Good morning, everyone. So my name is Donya Douglas-Bradshaw, and I'm the Lucy Project Manager. And I can't tell you, thank you. I can't tell you how honored I feel to participate in this session. So much so that I wanted to write down my remarks because I knew I would get emotional. So the other day, someone asked me why Lucy mattered. And I thought about Marcus Garvey, who said, "A people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots." Perpetual curiosity drives us to study the past and to examine our present in order to understand our future. Whether it's you or me tracking and recording our family history, or Dr. Johanson studying the various aspects of human evolution, or Lucy surveying the primordial remnants from the origin of our solar system, we each play an important role in preserving the entire human race. Thank you.
So I wanted to thank Donya. My name is Keith Noll. I'm the Lucy Project scientist, and I wanted to say a few more thoughts just about exploration in general. And so the first is that exploration is inherently unpredictable. And there's a story that I learned about fairly recently that Charles Darwin almost did not make it on board the Beagle. So in 1831, he's a 22-year-old student. He's at his cousin's house in the country. They're a well-to-do family. He's going to have a week or two of hunting, and then he's going to start his career as a country parson. And waiting for him is a letter from his college professor inviting him to take essentially a 2-year unpaid internship on this expedition to South America on a modest ship that's there mostly to explore the coastline, but he would be there as the naturalist on board. Charles was pretty excited about this. He wasn't a great student in school, but the one thing that he did like was natural history. A lot of that he learned from a freed slave who was teaching at the University of Edinburgh and taught him how to do taxidermy, which was critical for his preservation of the samples that he brought back that later led to the theory of evolution by natural selection. So he went to his father. His father was a doctor, kind of a stern person. His father said, "No, forget it. This is crazy. No rational person would take a job like this. You need to get started on your career." So Charles, being a dutiful son, wrote back and said, "Okay, I can't do it. I'm very, very sorry." But he really still wanted to go, so he talked to his uncle, and he then wrote very carefully thought through rational arguments to his father why this wasn't a crazy idea, and he convinced his father. His father changed his mind. So one admirable thing about Robert Darwin is that he was the kind of person whose mind could be changed. And so there's an element of hope in exploration too. Even when things seem very bad, there's still hope, and you have to keep trying. But you also have to be realistic. Because when Charles Darwin arrived in Plymouth, he accepted the offer. He arrived in Plymouth in December, waiting for the ship to leave. They had to wait for several weeks. He wrote in his diary it was the most miserable weeks of his life. Soon to be only more miserable by the weeks that he spent on board the ship having seasickness. So this was a very inauspicious beginning. And here we are at the beginning of our own exploration with Lucy. And we don't know what's going to happen. We hope it won't be weeks of seasickness, and we have, grand ambitions. But the fact that we do this without knowing the outcome, I think, says something very important about human beings in general. That we are explorers, and that we have hope. We named our mission after Lucy. And we're going to a group of asteroids that are named for characters from Greek mythology. We do not want to make the mistake that is so common in the Greek myths of hubris. So we do not know what the outcome will be. It's an aspirational name. We hope that we will have even a fraction of the impact that the discovery of the Lucy fossil did. And so that's the point that I wanted to make. And so now it's my honor to be able to introduce the person who is going to tell us about the discovery of the Lucy fossil. Donald Johanson has led expeditions all over the world. He's been on television. He's written books. He founded the Institute of Human Origins at the University of Arizona, where he teaches. Arizona State, oh my goodness. All right. I was a postdoc at U of A, so a little bit of rivalry there. Yeah, sorry, ASU, the bad Arizona University. No, just kidding. So it's a great honor and an incredible pleasure to be able to introduce Donald Johanson.
Thank you very much. I can't believe that I've been waiting my entire life to say that this really is rocket science. I've spent my life wandering around deserts in Africa looking for remains of our earliest human origins, and I always wanted to say that, but it's really not rocket science. Anyway, I am thrilled to be here and very excited, in fact. I've already got goosebumps thinking about tomorrow morning's launch. I hope I can sleep a few hours. And I want to thank everyone at NASA, everyone at the Southwest Research Institute, everyone from this visitor center, and all of you for coming out this morning to hear about my discovery, a discovery that really, in terms of what she means to me, is that she has united all of us together as humans. There's no question whatsoever that every one of us in this audience, regardless of what we look like or how we act or what culture or what religion or whatever we all have a common origin, and that common origin leads back to Africa. So we all have African genes in our genome, which is truly exceptional. And to me, what that means from a philosophical point of view is that we are united by our past, we're united as we are today, and as we move forward as a species, we must do this in a united fashion so that we will be good ancestors for our descendants. One of the things that was brought up in the introduction I want to go back to, and that is whenever I was going to Ethiopia on a regular basis or to some other place looking for something, a reporter would call me on the phone and say, "What do you expect to find?" And I always answered, "The unexpected." Because we never know what we're going to find when we go out on expeditions. Today, the director of the Institute of Human Origins, Johannes Haile Selassie, is in the audience. He's an Ethiopian-born paleoanthropologist, and when he began exploring an area north of where Lucy was discovered in Ethiopia, he didn't know exactly what he would find either, and has made fantastic discoveries that help us place Lucy on the human family tree. So we have, I've entitled this simply Ancestors, because we have a pretty good idea after the last roughly, I would imagine, 50 years, at least the broad strokes of how we became human. We know that we shared a common ancestor with chimpanzees 7 million plus years ago, and that one lineage led to the African apes, just as Charles Darwin and Thomas Henry Huxley predicted, and that the earliest evidence of humans on the planet comes from the African continent. That is really the cradle of humankind, the entire continent. It is where we were crafted through the process, as you heard in the introduction, of natural selection. And you do see Arizona State University up there, so I won't get fired. As a young kid growing up, I was 13 years old. I was very interested in the natural world. out collecting butterflies, and I had a little telescope, and I sort of saw the Jovian moons going around Jupiter and made little notes in my notebook, so I was kind of a nerd in high school. And one of the books I came across was Darwin's Origin of Species, but of course I didn't read that book because it had only one black and white diagram in it, and it was a big, very intimidating tome. So, but just next to it, in my friend's library, was this book, Man's Place in Nature. And this was written by Charles Darwin's closest friend, Thomas Henry Huxley. And Huxley had written a series of lectures about how closely we were related to the natural world, and how closely we were related to one another, and how closely we were related to the African apes. And it had skulls in it like this. This was the first Neanderthal skull that was found in Germany in 1856. And the specific point in that book that made me so excited was the idea that we and the African apes shared a common ancestor. And in the final paragraph of that book, he predicted that eventually some unborn paleontologist would make that discovery. And of course, already having somewhat of an ego at 13 years old, I thought, well, maybe that's me. And here you see that on the right, you see the chimpanzee, the gorilla, and humans, and we're identical in terms of the number of bones, much of the shape of the bones, the shape of teeth, the number of teeth. We differ because we walk around on two legs, right? We're bipedal, upright walking. Chimpanzees usually walk around on all four legs, as do gorillas. So there was this skeletal evidence. There was the evidence of teeth and jaws. We have a much larger skull than the others do. The skulls in this room are probably about 1,400 cubic centimeters. I think that's about 6 cups of coffee. And so we are very different in those two particular aspects from our closest living relatives. So obviously, I had to figure out, now, how do I get to Africa? So, of course, a little bit later, the Beatles went to Africa, as you may know. They were asked, how did you get to Africa? And they said, oh, turn right at Europe. But I went to Africa in 1970 for the very first time. I was a graduate student at the University of Chicago, and my professor was working in southern Ethiopia. And lo and behold, he issued me an invitation to go with him to the extreme southwestern part of Ethiopia known as the Omo region. And at that time, I can remember that morning, the first morning in Africa, waking up in a green tent, just like you see in the movies, and stepping out onto African soil and looking up at the sky. And for some reason, I kind of felt like I was home. And many people who travel to Africa, and I'll bet there are people in the audience who have gone, but we had dinner recently, Robin and I, with someone who said, boy, I want to go back to Africa. It gets into your blood. I said, not only is it in your blood, not only is it in your bones, it's in your genes. So it is a very special place to go. Ethiopia is an extraordinary country, a very large country, a country that is just at the end of the Great Rift Valley. And there is a triangular area up near the top where this little site of Hadar comes in. That's where Lucy was found. It's just one little pinpoint, if you can imagine, on global Earth. An anonymous little spot that no one had ever actually been to. So these explorations that we undertake take us to places that nobody ever goes to. And it's very interesting that I will never be able to go back in time, obviously, to the time when Lucy walked along the edge of a lake and died for one reason or another. Maybe she was dragged in by a crocodile. I understand that happens in Florida with alligators from time to time. And just as the Lucy mission will be going someplace that I doubt any of us in this audience will ever go to. So there's some symmetry there between these two explorations. And what this launch tomorrow will do, it will bring us to the present and it will lead us into the future. It's an extraordinary opportunity. So Ethiopia is an incredible country. I also urge any and all of you, when you go to Africa, to visit Ethiopia. It was the first place where Christianity came, in the northern part where there are incredible historic monuments and so on. And it really possesses or preserves the most complete, oldest record of human evolution going back to almost 7 million years ago, right on up to the origins of Homo sapiens. We are all Homo sapiens in this room. So it really occupies an extraordinary place geographically in terms of our searching. And it's beautiful. I hope you like this kind of landscape. But you see, this is Hadar itself in all its glory. And this was one of the first views I saw when I went to this site in 1972. And I was standing up on this plateau looking out, and it was everything that a paleoanthropologist could dream of. There were layers of rock, like a layer cake. There were white layers that were volcanic ash that could be dated to give us ages of the fossils. There was a river. You see the green running through there. That's a riverine forest, and that's the Awash River. So there was a permanent source of water for an expedition like this. So the geology was perfect. The exposures were very deeply cut, which meant that it spanned some length of time. Now, here is where we established our camp. I don't know how many of you have spotted our camp, but there it is. And there's no Walgreens nearby. There's no grocery store. So you've got to bring with you everything you need. Otherwise, it's going to take you a day to drive to Addis Ababa, which is the capital, and to drive back for another day. And that's where we live for 2 months a year. And to give you a little closer look, whoops, we skipped a picture. So there's our camp set up right along the Awash River, and that's where my colleagues and I, students, Ethiopian scholars, some of the local Afar people, that's where we live for roughly 2 months a year in a little tent, smaller than half the size of the stage that I'm standing on, and systematically go out day in and day out as early as we can, because it gets very, very hot here, just as it does in Florida, I guess, but 105 degrees, and it's pretty hot to be out there looking for fossils. And that's where we have a kitchen, we have work tents, we have a dining tent, we take our showers, we use water from the river. And what really blew my mind when I went down there for the first time was that there were fossils like this. This is an elephant skull emerging out of a beach sand, exactly where it died and was buried about 3.3 million years ago. And every tooth is perfect, every bit of the anatomy of the skull is preserved, and with completeness like this, we were hoping to find human ancestor fossils or ancient hominins, because we knew from the elephant and from the pigs that were found at the site, lots of fossil pigs, and they're very good for telling us what time it is. It's like if we go out, a group of us, and find a dinosaur tooth, you know that that rock it came out of had to be older than 65 million years, because dinosaurs died out then. So these are very time diagnostic fossils. We were hoping to find human fossils because we knew nothing or very little about what our ancestry looked like between 3 and 4 million years ago. So on the morning of November 24th, in the 50th anniversary, I can't believe it, except when I look in the mirror in the morning, that all those years have gone by, but it will soon be 50 years since that epic morning when I went out with a graduate student of mine, Tom Gray, and I was walking along, and is that me who did that? No, okay. So you see some people down below there. They're screening the sand. That's pretty much the exact spot where I found the first bone. It was a little piece of elbow. They say elbows stick out. So it was this part of the elbow. And I knew from all the hours I had spent in the anatomy lab and studying osteology, and which is study of bones, and studying teeth and so on, but I knew from the shape of that bone, from its anatomy, that it was not an antelope, it was not a baboon, it couldn't be any other kind of mammal. And I felt it came from a human ancestor. And as I kneeled down with my graduate student and looked, there were pieces of a skull. And then I looked up that slope behind people, and Well, that's the first bone I found right there. It's called the ulna. It's what allows you to flex and extend your arm at the elbow. And here you see, of course, you know he's a graduate student because he's doing all the work there. And I'm much thinner in those days and tan, standing in the background. And we're collecting pieces of the skeleton, yes, wrapping them up in toilet paper, which cushions them, and putting in little markers all along the way so we could map these in and know the relationships between these bones. So we have reconstructed this. It was probably a beach where Lucy was walking. We didn't know her name was Lucy, of course, where this early human ancestor was walking. There's one little puncture mark in her pelvis. Maybe she was going down to get some water or collect turtle or crocodile eggs or crabs. We have fossil crabs from this layer. And she was caught unawares and dragged into the lake and settled to the bottom of that lake and was preserved. And so that's what the site looked like. I was just simply walking back to my Land Rover thinking about a swim in the river because it was so hot, and I glanced over my right shoulder, and there it was. If we had not found her that day, we probably would not have gone back to the specific spot because there were not many fossils there. So here she is. I think you all recognize her. And the evening that we were celebrating in camp, the discovery, I had a little Sony tape recorder with me, and I was playing Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, being a big Beatles fan, still am. And Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was playing. And someone on the expedition, one of the expedition members, Pam Alderman, said, "Well, you think this is a female, Don?" I said, "I do, because it's so small." She said, "Well, could it be a child?" I said, "No, because the wisdom teeth are erupted." So it was a full adult, even though it was only about 3.5 feet tall. It was a fully matured adult. And she said, "Well, if you think it's a female, why don't we call her Lucy?" And I said, "No, I can't call her Lucy." I said, "I'm a scientist, you know. We have to have some name like Australopithecus afarensis." And it was too late, because the next morning at breakfast, everybody said, "You going back to the Lucy site? You think you'll find more of Lucy? How old was Lucy when she died?" And all of a sudden, she became known as almost a person. After 3.2 million years, she was sort of reanimated when she eroded out of that sandstone at about 3.2 million years. And so she has become, in many ways, the benchmark by which so many other discoveries are compared to. Older than Lucy, younger than Lucy, less complete than Lucy, more complete than Lucy, bigger brain than Lucy, or whatever. And if you go there, say, if you go to Ethiopia as a tourist, you will see there is a stone marker there in the English language, our language, in Amharic, which is the national language of Ethiopia. It's the only African language that has its own script. And also in honor of the local people, the Afar people who live there. These are nomadic tribesmen. It's written in Afar. Well, one of the things that was really missing was the fact that here she was found in Ethiopia, and she had an anglicized name. And there was a director general from the Ministry of Culture who came out very excited right after the discovery. The news got back to Addis Ababa, and people from the Ministry of Culture came out. And he said, "She deserves an Ethiopian name." And I said, "Well, I bet your Amharic's better than mine." And he called her Dinkanesh, which means "you are wonderful." So she has an Amharic name, Dinkanesh. She has an English name, Lucy, and she has an Afar name also, which is Helomali, which means more or less "you are wonderful." So the question was, we've got a pelvis. Can we tell from the pelvis everything that everybody's sitting? I see people standing in the background, my goodness. But it's what you're sitting on, your pelvis, and we had enough to at least get the rough shape of the brain, of the skull, so we knew that she had a very small brain. It was about chimpanzee size, in fact. And from the pelvis, we thought we would compare her to a modern human pelvis on the left and a chimpanzee pelvis on the right. And you don't have to have a PhD in anthropology to answer this question. Does Lucy's pelvis in the middle look more like the human pelvis or the chimpanzee pelvis? Obviously, like the human pelvis. So we were able to ascertain without any question that she was upright walking, which was one of the things that Charles Darwin pointed out as being so important. He said when our ancestors, millions of years ago, he didn't know when, we don't know exactly when, but he postulated that our ancestors, rightfully so, were arboreal, that they lived in trees, and probably coordinated with maybe food competition, climate change, or whatever. Some of them came out of the trees and began walking on the ground. And they did not opt for four-legged walking. Upright walking, as you know, even though it's fairly clumsy, has been very successful. There are about 8 billion of us on the planet. So this was a successful adaptation, and is one of the first things that happens when we look at very ancient humans, that our ancestors stood upright. This is an older illustration. On the right, Lucy, we now know, has that cervical neck curve in the spine, as well as a lumbar curve. And one thing you will notice right away is how long her arms were. And that's probably something left over when her ancestors were climbing in the trees. That the first thing that natural selection mentioned in the introduction targeted was the change in the anatomy of the pelvis and the knee and the ankle. Big brains came later, shortened arms or elongated legs came later, and bigger brains came later. So that erupted into an enormous controversy. You know, science is very interesting because when we hypothesize or postulate certain things about the natural world, there's always someone who will disagree with you. And that's a good thing because we need more evidence to support our hypotheses or our propositions. And just following on the heels of Lucy's discovery, a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, Mary Leakey, who is now deceased, you know, Mary and Louis Leakey worked at Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania and were pioneers in Eastern Africa. And Mary came to my site. Her son Richard flew her up from Kenya, and she said, I've got to go back to a site that my husband and I visited way back in 1939. There are bones there, but we didn't find any humans. We didn't find any tools. So Louis Leakey said, if there are no tools, there can't be humans there. So they went back to that site. And that site is known as Laitoli in Tanzania. And at that site, there was 3.7 million years ago, 500,000 years before Lucy, some of her relatives were living there. They didn't know one another, obviously. But what happened was there was a volcanic eruption. And you know there's one happening right now, major eruptions on planet Earth. And a lot of volcanic ash went into the air, which you see in the background. And it filled the ground. It covered the ground like a snow, a newly fallen snow. And there was a light rain, and at least 2 of Lucy's ancestors walked across there. And obviously they weren't wearing shoes in those days, and left footprints. The ultimate evidence that we needed to certainly prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they were walking upright, because that's the footprint they left in that ash. And you all in this room have walked on a beach, and the next time you do, walk on that beach and look down. And what do you see? You see the big toe print, you see the arch of the foot, you see the strike of the heel, and this happened 3.7 million years ago. The question came up quite a while ago. I was on an airplane, as I am frequently, and sitting next to somebody who wanted to know everything about me. And I was really trying to prepare for a lecture on the plane. And he said, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm a paleoanthropologist. He thought I studied old anthropologists. But so I told him that, and he said, well, did you ever find anything? And I told him about Lucy, and he said, oh, no kidding. He said, did you ever find anything else? So I just show you, these collections are mostly from the 1970s, but because of our expeditions, because of Johannes' expeditions, we have probably over 500 specimens of Lucy's species between roughly 3.9 million years and 3 million years, and that's important. That's the best known, most completely known species of Australopithecus from anywhere. And that makes that collection the go-to collection, which rests in the National Museum of Ethiopia in Addis Ababa. All these fossils are in the country of origin, where people can make comparisons over time. And we're just beginning to look at how changes might occur over time. This is the boring slide, so if you want to nod off. But this shows you that there is a geological column, that most of that is Australopithecus afarensis on the right-hand side. You see that she's dated at about 3.2 million years. And what is so exciting is at the top of our geological section, there is a section of missing time where it was eroded or no deposition was laid down. And just above that, there's a volcanic ash dated at 2.3 million. And we found a complete upper jaw of our own genus Homo. So this has opened up a very interesting new stimulus for us to try to understand when our own genus arrived, why it arrived, what it was doing differently from Australopithecus, and what its earliest appearance was. Other people at the Institute of Human Origins, where we work, like Kay Reed, has found things that go back to 2.6 million years, and beginning to find things even older. And what that means for us is that we're beginning to understand where the genus Homo came from and what other kinds of Lucy descendants there were. The other thing that's happening is when afarensis disappears about 3 million years ago, the forested environments were beginning to disappear, and the savannas and bushlands were appearing. And some of our ancestors ventured out onto that landscape to new dangers of a whole group of predators, dangers of finding new food. They didn't have their fruits and nuts and things, turtle eggs and crocodile eggs and birds' eggs and all the things that they were familiar with. So they had to develop new strategies. And that's one of the important things about understanding natural selection. Those individuals who could find food on a regular basis and support themselves and their offspring left that ability in their genes to the next generation. And that led to brain enlargement and ultimately to all of us in this room. So Lucy and probably her ancestors lived in these more forested environments, much like chimpanzees and gorillas live in. And because of climate change, there was a stimulus, there was a reason for changing. And those that could make that change ultimately survived. We're beginning to know a lot more about how a baby Lucy would grow up into an adult. Here's a 3-year-old being held by its mother. This was found by another Ethiopian paleoanthropologist, Zeresanai Alamsenged, who works at the University of Chicago, was a postdoc at the Institute. He found part of a child's skull and a skeleton. And we can say that already at this stage of 3.3 million years ago, there was probably a 20% increase already in the average size of the brain over chimpanzees. So the stimulus was there, the journey began. And we have complete skulls, finally, for males and females. As you see on the left, there's a female, and on the right, not a very good-looking male. Big surprise. And so we're beginning to really look into the biology of these creatures and to figure out where they lived, how they lived, and where they're placed on the human family tree. And there are two branches. The branch on the left that leads to Homo, the branch on the right leads to other species. One is named after Ethiopia, Australopithecus aethiopicus, Australopithecus boisei. That line died out. They were dedicated vegetarians and were outcompeted for food, I think, about 1 million years ago for various reasons. And that lineage died out. But the one on the left that began to live on a high energy diet, a high protein diet that could feed a developing hungry brain, that is to say, they were out there scavenging meat, ultimately hunting meat, survived, and ultimately evolved into all of us today. So this is just to show you that my current hypothesis, which I proposed way back in 1978, is that Lucy is on the pivotal point on the family tree where you see the red circle that gave rise to all of us today, as well as to those who died out. So it's very interesting. When I was listening to that wonderful introduction, roots are very important. And as I often say, that no matter where we grasp a branch on the human family tree, the roots all lead back to Africa. Thank you very much.